For more than 20 years of studying relationship dynamics, I have witnessed something that continues to surprise people. I have seen avoidant individuals walk away from connections that, from the outside, appeared incredibly rare and valuable. They left relationships with partners who were compassionate, understanding, emotionally available, and deeply committed. I have watched them create distance from people who showed remarkable patience, respected boundaries, offered support without pressure, and loved them with a consistency that many spend a lifetime hoping to find. These partners were not careless or demanding. In many cases, they handled the relationship exactly as experts would advise. Yet the avoidant still withdrew. What has fascinated me most is what happens when those same individuals encounter a certain kind of person. These are the avoidants who seem untouchable, independent to an extreme degree, and protected behind emotional walls that appear impossible to penetrate. Then suddenly, something shifts. Their usual patterns begin to wobble. Their carefully maintained distance becomes harder to sustain. The defenses that once seemed permanent no longer function in quite the same way. This change does not always lead to a perfect ending, nor does it guarantee a lasting relationship. But it creates an impact unlike anything I have consistently observed throughout years of examining avoidant behavior. Today, I want to talk about that particular type of person because there is a strong possibility that if this message resonates with you, you may recognize yourself in this description. The individual who affects an avoidant most deeply is often misunderstood. It is not necessarily the person who sacrifices the most. It is not the one who endlessly waits, constantly adapts, or continuously rearranges their needs to accommodate the avoidant's comfort zone. While those qualities can be beautiful expressions of love, they often fail to create the effect people expect. In fact, they frequently strengthen the avoidant's instinct to retreat. The reason lies in the nature of the avoidant wound itself. At its core, avoidance is highly sensitive to perceived emotional obligation. When an avoidant senses that another person depends on them for validation, stability, reassurance, or emotional security, their nervous system often interprets that as pressure. Even when the love is sincere and well-intentioned, if it carries visible desperation or attachment to a specific outcome, it can feel overwhelming to someone who fears emotional engulfment. What looks like devotion to one person may register as expectation to another. As a result, the avoidant instinctively seeks distance, not because they do not care, but because closeness begins to feel emotionally unsafe. The person who reaches them on a much deeper level possesses a very different energy. This is an empath with extraordinary emotional awareness, someone who experiences life with tremendous depth and sensitivity. They notice subtle shifts, understand unspoken emotions, and often perceive what others miss entirely. Yet what makes them powerful is not their sensitivity alone. It is the fact that they are no longer ruled by it. Their emotional depth has been refined through experience. They have faced their own pain, confronted their fears, navigated periods of loss, confusion, and self-discovery, and emerged with a stronger relationship to themselves. Because of that journey, their emotions have become a source of strength rather than fragility. They feel deeply without becoming consumed. They care intensely without losing their center. Their compassion is genuine, but it is not dependent on being chosen. Their love is expansive, yet it does not come from a place of lack. This creates a presence that feels profoundly different to an avoidant. Instead of sensing emotional pressure, the avoidant encounters someone who remains grounded regardless of what happens. There is warmth, affection, and genuine desire, but there is also self-possession. This empath does not require the avoidant in order to feel whole. They are already connected to themselves. Their happiness, identity, and emotional stability do not hinge on another person's availability. They can love fully while remaining rooted in their own life. And paradoxically, that is what makes their connection so impactful. The avoidant feels wanted rather than needed. They feel invited rather than obligated. For perhaps the first time, they encounter a bond that does not demand that they carry another person's emotional world. Instead, they stand in the presence of someone whose emotional depth is matched by emotional independence. That combination is extraordinarily rare. It creates a level of respect and intrigue that can bypass defenses that normally remain locked in place. The avoidant senses authenticity, strength, and emotional maturity all at once. They are drawn towards someone who understands intimacy without clinging to it, someone capable of profound connection without sacrificing themselves. And it is often this sovereign emotional presence, more than patience, pursuit, or accommodation, that reaches the avoidant in ways nothing else can. What makes this kind of person so impactful is that their openness is not dependent on receiving the exact response they hope for. They can offer affection, understanding, and emotional honesty without making those things conditional on whether the avoidant gives the same energy back. That subtle but powerful distinction creates a dynamic the avoidant's usual defenses struggle to navigate. It is the rare combination of emotional depth and emotional self-sufficiency, and it disrupts patterns that would normally play out almost automatically. Most people, when they invest emotionally, unconsciously attach expectations to their giving. They hope their care will be returned in equal measure. They hope their loyalty will inspire loyalty. They hope their patience will be rewarded with closeness. But the sovereign empath learns a different lesson. They understand that love offered freely is not the same as love offered in exchange for a specific outcome. Their emotional generosity does not arise from a hidden contract. It emerges from the simple fact that they know who they are. Because they are secure within themselves, they do not experience every inconsistency as a threat to their identity. They can remain emotionally present without becoming emotionally dependent. This creates a sense of freedom within the relationship that the avoidant rarely encounters. The avoidant expects emotional investment to eventually transform into pressure, obligation, or demand. Yet here stands someone who remains open-hearted while simultaneously respecting their own boundaries. This combination feels unfamiliar because it does not fit the templates the avoidant has relied upon for years. The empath's presence quietly communicates something powerful. I care about you deeply, but I will not lose myself trying to keep you. And that message reaches places within the avoidant that words often cannot. To understand why this has such a profound impact, you have to understand what the avoidant defense system was originally built to manage. It developed as a response to emotional pressure, particularly the feeling that another person's emotional well-being rests heavily on their shoulders. Somewhere in their development, closeness became associated with responsibility, expectation, or emotional overwhelm. As a result, intimacy itself began to feel complicated. On the surface, they may desire connection as much as anyone else. They may long for companionship, understanding, and love. Yet when those things become available, another part of them becomes activated. It interprets closeness as a potential threat to autonomy. When someone becomes visibly affected by their distance, when anxiety increases and pursuit begins, the avoidance instinct is often to create even more space. The more they feel pursued, the more they feel the urge to retreat. It becomes a familiar cycle. One person moves closer, the other moves away. Distance fuels longing, longing fuels pursuit, and pursuit fuels further withdrawal. Anyone who has been deeply involved with an avoidant knows how exhausting and painful that pattern can become. Over time, both people become trapped inside roles they never consciously chose. One becomes the pursuer, the other becomes the distancer. Each person's behavior unintentionally reinforces the other's fears. The pursuer fears abandonment, so they move closer. The avoidant fears engulfment, so they move away. And the cycle continues until both individuals feel misunderstood. Yet beneath the surface, neither person is truly getting what they want. Both are simply reacting to wounds that remain unresolved. The sovereign empath responds differently. When the avoidant creates distance, they do not immediately chase after reassurance. This does not mean they are unaffected. In reality, they often feel the shift more deeply than most people. Their sensitivity allows them to notice subtle emotional changes long before others would. They can sense a shift in tone, a withdrawal of energy, or an unspoken tension before a single word is spoken. But instead of directing that discomfort outward, They turn inward. Rather than seeking immediate validation from the avoidant, they reconnect with themselves. They draw strength from their own emotional foundation. They remind themselves of something they have learned through experience. Their worth is not determined by another person's ability to show up consistently. They understand that someone else's withdrawal is not always a reflection of their value. Because of this awareness, they resist the temptation to abandon themselves in moments of uncertainty. They continue investing in their own life, their own growth, and their own sense of purpose. They do not place their emotional stability entirely in another person's hands. As a result, when the avoidant pulls away, they are met not with panic or pursuit, but with calmness. And that changes everything. The usual pattern has nowhere to go. There is no emotional pressure to escape from. There is no desperate reaching that reinforces the avoidant's sense of being the less invested partner. There is no visible struggle that allows them to maintain their identity as the detached one. Instead, they encounter something unfamiliar, a person who remains centered, composed, and connected to themselves regardless of what the avoidant chooses to do. In many ways, the empath becomes living proof that connection does not have to involve control, fear, or dependency. That quiet confidence can be deeply unsettling for an avoidant because it removes the dynamics they unconsciously expect. For perhaps the first time, they are standing in front of someone who does not abandon themselves in order to maintain connection. The empath remains open, caring, and emotionally available, yet they do not collapse when reciprocity is inconsistent. They stay grounded in who they are. And to the avoidant, that level of inner stability is both confusing and magnetic. It challenges assumptions they may not even realize they carry. They are accustomed to relationships where distance increases emotional intensity. They are accustomed to seeing their withdrawal provoke reactions. Yet when those reactions do not appear, something unexpected happens. The avoidant is left alone with their own emotions. The usual distractions are gone. There is no pursuit to focus on, no conflict to justify distance, no drama to create separation. Instead, there is silence. And within that silence, deeper questions begin to emerge. They may start wondering why this person feels different, why their absence is noticed in a new way, why the connection remains present even when pressure is absent. The answer often lies in the fact that the sovereign empath embodies a form of emotional maturity that the avoidant rarely encounters. They are not attempting to possess the relationship. They are participating in it while remaining connected to themselves. This creates a sense of safety that can gradually lower defenses. The avoidant begins to realize that intimacy does not necessarily require the loss of freedom. That realization alone can become the beginning of profound inner change. It is important to understand that this empath is not operating from denial or fantasy. They are not overlooking reality in order to preserve hope. In fact, one of their defining qualities is the ability to see the avoidant clearly. They are not attached to an idealized image or a future version that may never exist. They do not fall in love solely with potential. They see the person exactly as they are in the present moment. They recognize the beauty that exists within the avoidant, the moments of vulnerability, the genuine connection, the sincerity that occasionally breaks through the protective walls. But they also recognize the limitations. They see the emotional distancing, the inconsistency, the tendency to withdraw when intimacy deepens, and the ways unresolved wounds influence behavior. They do not ignore these realities, nor do they exaggerate them. Their perspective is balanced and honest. What makes them different is that they hold both truths at the same time. They can appreciate the meaningful aspects of the connection without pretending the challenges do not exist. They do not place the avoidant on a pedestal, but neither do they become consumed by bitterness or resentment. Their vision remains clear. They understand that love is strongest when it is rooted in reality rather than fantasy. And because they see the avoidant without distortion, without idealization, and without condemnation, they create a type of relational mirror that is exceptionally rare. In that mirror, the avoidant is seen completely. Their strengths are visible, their fears are visible, their longing for connection is visible, Their defenses are visible. Nothing is hidden behind illusion, and there is something profoundly transformative about being seen that honestly. For many avoidants, the greatest fear is not rejection, but exposure. Yet, when they are seen fully and still met with understanding rather than judgment, a new possibility emerges. They begin to experience a kind of acceptance that does not require performance, perfection, or emotional armor. In that moment, the relationship becomes more than a connection between two people. It becomes an invitation for healing, growth, and the gradual dismantling of defenses that may have remained untouched for years. What makes this dynamic even more powerful is the way this empath holds their understanding of the avoidant. They possess a rare form of compassion, one that is neither blind nor naive. They see reality exactly as it is, yet they meet it with understanding instead of condemnation. For many avoidants, this is something they have almost never experienced. Throughout much of their relational history, people tend to respond to them in one of two ways. At first, they are often idealized, viewed as mysterious, special, or emotionally deeper than they actually allow themselves to reveal. Then, when the distance and inconsistency begin to create pain, that idealization often transforms into frustration, disappointment, or resentment. The avoidant becomes accustomed to this sequence. They expect admiration to eventually become criticism. They expect understanding to eventually become anger. As a result, their defenses remain firmly in place. But when they encounter someone who sees every contradiction, every strength, every limitation, and every wound without turning that awareness into judgment, something inside them begins to shift. Being understood at that level is already uncommon. Being understood at that level while still being met with kindness is almost unheard of. This is where the avoidant's protective structure begins to lose its purpose. Those walls were built to defend against rejection, pressure, disappointment, and emotional demands. They were constructed from years of learning that closeness often comes with expectations they feel unable to fulfill. But when someone sees them clearly and remains calm, respectful, and present, the walls struggle to justify their existence. The usual reasons for maintaining distance no longer feel as convincing. The defenses have fewer places to hide. There is another quality that makes this empath especially impactful, and it may be the most important one of all. They do not approach the avoidant as a project. They do not view the relationship as a mission to heal, rescue, or transform another person. On the surface, that may sound simple, but in practice, it is extraordinarily rare. Many people who love avoidants believe they are accepting them exactly as they are. Yet underneath that acceptance often exists a quiet expectation. There is a hope that enough patience, enough understanding, enough love, or enough time will eventually lead the avoidant to change. Even when it remains unspoken, that expectation is often felt. The avoidant senses it. They recognize that the patience being offered comes attached to an anticipated outcome. They feel the desire for them to become more available, more expressive, more emotionally present, and even though that desire comes from love, it can still feel like pressure. Acceptance becomes conditional. Space becomes a strategy. Patience becomes an investment waiting for a return. The sovereign empath operates differently. Their acceptance is genuine because it is not dependent on future transformation. They are not secretly waiting for the avoidant to become someone else. They are not counting emotional progress like milestones on a roadmap. They simply meet the person standing in front of them. Their presence is not a negotiation. It is not an unspoken contract. It is an offering that exists without hidden conditions attached. That kind of agenda-free connection is so unfamiliar to many avoidants that it reaches places their defenses cannot easily protect. They may not be able to explain why it affects them. In fact, they often struggle to put it into words, yet they feel it deeply. Beneath their thoughts, beneath their coping mechanisms, beneath the identity they have built around independence and emotional self-protection, something recognizes the authenticity of what is being offered. And once they experience that level of presence, they are rarely untouched by it. Whether the relationship lasts or not, whether they fully understand what happened or not, the encounter leaves an imprint. It challenges assumptions they have carried for years. It introduces them to a form of connection that feels fundamentally different from what they have known before. This is the type of empath that reaches the avoidant most profoundly. Not because they chase harder, not because they sacrifice more, not because they love with greater intensity. They reach them because they combine extraordinary sensitivity with extraordinary self-possession. They remain open without becoming dependent. They remain compassionate without abandoning their boundaries. They remain deeply connected to others while remaining deeply rooted in themselves. And if you recognize yourself in this description, if you carry that combination of emotional depth, grounded strength, clear perception, and quiet compassion, then there is something important you need to remember. You were never excessive. You were never difficult to love because of the depth of your feelings. You were never a burden because of the size of your heart. The issue was never that you felt too much or cared too deeply. The reality is far simpler. Sometimes the person standing across from you had not yet developed the emotional capacity required to fully receive what you were capable of offering. Your depth was never the problem. It was always a reflection of your strength. In the end, the empath who leaves the deepest and most lasting impact on an avoidant is rarely the person who spends years chasing after their attention, waiting endlessly for them to change, or sacrificing their own needs in the hope of finally being chosen. While many people believe that proving loyalty through constant pursuit will eventually break through an avoidant's walls, the reality is often very different. The person who truly stays in the avoidant's mind is the one who remains emotionally available while never abandoning their own sense of self. They understand the difference between love and self-sacrifice. They know how to care deeply without making another person the center of their entire existence. Their strength does not come from controlling the relationship or demanding reassurance. Instead, it comes from their ability to stay grounded in their own worth, regardless of how another person responds. They can see the avoidant's fears and emotional struggles without taking responsibility for fixing them. They can recognize the wounds beneath the distance without excusing unhealthy behavior. This balanced presence creates something powerful because it introduces the avoidant to a form of connection that feels unfamiliar. It is connection without pressure, affection without control, understanding without expectations, and closeness without emotional demands. For someone accustomed to protecting themselves through distance, this kind of energy can be deeply disarming because it challenges the belief that intimacy always leads to obligation, loss of freedom, or emotional overwhelm. What makes this type of empath unforgettable is not their willingness to endure endless uncertainty, but their ability to maintain their own identity while offering genuine compassion. They do not lose themselves in another person's emotional landscape. They do not abandon their dreams, values, or self-respect in order to keep a relationship alive. Instead, they demonstrate something that many avoidants secretly admire and struggle to understand: emotional security. They show that love can exist alongside healthy boundaries, that care does not require control, and that intimacy does not have to come at the expense of individuality. Even when the relationship does not unfold as hoped, their impact remains because they represented a different possibility, one where connection felt safe, respectful, and free from emotional games. And if you recognize these qualities within yourself, remember this truth: your depth was never your weakness. Your sensitivity was never the reason relationships became difficult. The ability to feel deeply, love sincerely, and understand others on an emotional level is not a flaw to be corrected. It is a strength that should be valued and protected. The right people will not be intimidated by your compassion, overwhelmed by your emotional wisdom, or frightened by your capacity for genuine connection. They will have the emotional maturity and self-awareness to meet you where you are. Until those people arrive, continue investing in the most important relationship you will ever have, the one with yourself. Honor your worth, trust your intuition, and never shrink your light to make someone else feel comfortable. The more deeply you value yourself, the more naturally you attract relationships that reflect that same level of respect, understanding, and emotional depth.